I'd like to read from the Gospel of Matthew tonight, just a couple of verses from Matthew chapter 7. And Matthew records these words of our Lord, and beginning in verse 21. Matthew writes, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.'" And may God bless the reading of His Word to us this evening. A couple of weeks ago, we had our annual county fair here in Fillmore County. I trust that probably quite a few got out there. We always try to get there at least once and maybe twice. And when we do, we like to walk through the exhibits, of course, and see who's taking home all the ribbons that year and everything. And some of you did pretty well. I know this last year. We also like to take some time and walk through, of course, the horse barn. In fact, that's really our favorite. Sometimes we save it till the very end. Sometimes we do it at the beginning, then also go through at the end as well. And if we can, we like to try and even get out there for some of the horse contests and shows and the judges and things they're having out there. And as we walk through the barns and check out the horses, most of them are what you would call slick horses. And by that I mean that they don't have any kind of additional markings on them to prove ownership. But every so often at the county fair, you'll find a horse that has a brand on it. That's the opposite of a slick horse. And while there are some folks in Minnesota who do register their own brands, or even some folks here in Fillmore County actually who have their own brands registered in their names, usually the presence of a brand means that animal has come in from the Dakotas or maybe even from further out west, because brands are of course pretty popular out there. Actually, they're so popular that in the state of Montana, for instance, there are actually 54,000 registered brands out there. And there's a lot of different types of brands. BLM Mustangs, of course, have the Freeze brands on the side of the neck, on the left side of their neck. You might have noticed that registered Arabians have a similar brand on the right side of their neck. Thoroughbreds, on the other hand, have a tattoo on the inside of their upper lip, so you can identify them that way. And brands kind of reflect, I guess, an old collar mentality that goes like this: trust your neighbors, but brand your stock. So, obvious reasons for that. And there are kind of three rules that you use when you're trying to read a brand. And the first rule is that if there are letters that are side by side, you read that brand by going from left to right. So if you have an M beside an L, then that would be the ML brand. Or if you have items that are stacked on top of each other, then you read from the top down. So if you have a bar on top of the letter B, that's the Bar B ranch, and I guess that the ranch foreman's name is probably Ken or something like that. So it's the best I can come up with on the spur of the moment. Okay, well, sorry about that. It's worse on Sunday morning sometimes, no. Or if you have a letter that's enclosed in something, like say inside of a circle, then you go from the outside in. So if you have a K, then it would be the Circle K brand or things like that. And brands are actually pretty valuable. They're oftentimes sold with a ranch. And they'll stay with that, with whoever buys the new ranch, and they'll, even though it's not their initials, they'll keep that brand. And some states are pretty strict upon brand registration. Texas doesn't have any kind of state registration. You actually register your brand in your own county. But in the state of South Dakota in particular, there are some pretty strict requirements right now. In fact, if you are trailering horses out in the Dakotas, once you get past the Missouri River, you have to have some kind of registration for your horse. And you either have to have a brand inspection, or you have to buy a permit ahead of time that will allow you to transport your horse without having to stop for an inspection. But in order to do that, it has to be inspected before you cross the Missouri and enter that restricted area in South Dakota. And if you sell a horse or buy a horse west of the Missouri in South Dakota, that horse has to be inspected by a state brand inspector before it can actually change ownership. And of course, it's inspected to verify that that horse actually not only belongs to the person who claims ownership, but that the brand that's on that horse is actually the correct identification for the owner of that animal as well. And I've been kind of thinking, if and brands, of course, can be altered. That's a part of the reason for the inspection. You can sometimes add bars here or there, or change a brand a little bit if an animal's been stolen. So the inspectors have to prove that that's actually the animal. But I've been thinking, if horses can sometimes, or cattle can sometimes carry one brand, but actually belong to somebody else, I've been wondering if we can sometimes be like that too. In other words, if we can kind of identify ourselves with one brand when the reality is the brand that we're claiming to identify with may not be the brand that we really belong to. And for instance, a lot of us, of course, are members of a church somewhere. My guess is that probably the majority of you are members of a church somewhere, maybe here, maybe somewhere else, or maybe you're just visiting, that's fine too, you're always welcome. But probably a lot of us have been confirmed as well at some time. You've been baptized. Maybe you've stood up in front of a church and you've made some kind of profession of faith. And when we do that, we're kind of branding ourselves. We're saying that we belong to Jesus Christ. But I wonder sometimes if some of us don't carry one brand on the outside, but if a spiritual brand inspector was actually checking us out, if they might find that we belong to somebody else on the inside. Because while we can sometimes claim that we belong to Christ, and that's the brand that we bear and carry, we don't always live like it. And I've been kind of thinking about that, and I wonder if a spiritual brand inspector was going to inspect our brand and see if we really belong to Jesus Christ, what would they look at? And I suppose that there are a lot of things that you could look at. You might pause and look at somebody's money. Godfrey Davis once wrote a biography about the Duke of Wellington, and he said that he found an old account ledger that showed how the Duke had spent his money. And he went on to say that offered him a far better clue as to what the Duke had thought was really important than anything that he read in any of his letters, or in any of his journals, or in any of his diaries, or in any of his speeches. Because how we use our wealth, how we use our money, indicates our real priorities and what's really of value, what's really important to us. And I wonder if a spiritual brand inspector tonight was to go through your checkbook, who would they decide you really belong to? Would the brand on the outside be the same brand that they would conclude you're really carrying on the inside?